informed that I would be chairing the two very important CPP meetings where we will be discussing the local plan. I was absolutely ecstatic. Just before we get through the agenda, I just want to mention a few things. The first is that, of course, this is one of two meetings, and so this is the first half, and it's important to note that today is focused on very much on listening, and our hope is that we'll hopefully be able to make some decisions at next week's meeting. So we're not intending to have any votes today. I think the second thing that is very important to note for everybody is, of course, we have had a local plan submitted to the inspector, and our plan was not deemed sound, and we, according to the inspector, are not meeting our objective housing needs. So that is the context within which we're hopefully going to have a really fruitful discussion. And I guess the third thing I'd like everybody to be extremely aware of when you are adding your comments today, it is that we are one district, one borough, and so as much as everybody will certainly have very passionate views about particular areas, be it as a ward councillor or a resident or developer, etc., we need to hopefully get to a point where we have one view that we're able to submit to the inspector. And sorry, one more thing. Do we have any Liverpool fans here? Okay, well... we're not in Liverpool, so... Thank you. I'll remember that when you ask to speak, Councillor. But I am a Liverpool fan, and Liverpool are playing right now, and of course I'm here and not watching my beloved team, and it's my hope that all of our officers this time next week will not be walking alone in their attempts to push on with this local plan. Okay, agenda item number 1, substitutions. Get it. Oh, sorry, I have something I need to read first. Those present at this meeting should be aware that by law it can be recorded by anyone attending. This means the meeting can be filmed, audio recorded, photographed, or reported electronically by the use of social media. The meeting is being webcasted. This does not apply to any part of the meeting that is held in private session. Therefore, anyone present should be aware that they could be recorded at this meeting. Any member of the public who does not wish to be filmed should move to an area of this meeting room away from the camera. Anyone recording must cease as soon as the meeting is declared closed. Is it anyone's intention to film or record this meeting? Person there, anybody else? Okay. Agenda item number 1, substitutions. Good.
Chairman, we have substitution. We have Councillor Rebecca Lass for Stephen Bolton and Councillor Sunny Thusu for Tony Kingsbury. And apologies from Stephen Bolton and Tony Kingsbury.
Thank you. Minutes. Can we confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of January 2020? Do we all agree? Good. Item 4, notification of urgent business. Do we have any urgent business? Thank you. Agenda item number 5, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Thank you. Agenda item number 6, public question time and petitions. I believe the first person is Nigel Matthews, Chairman of North Mims District Greenbelt Society. Do you want to, come towards the front? Just because it's webcasted, it's best that you speak into the microphone. Someone will show you where you need to go.
Thank you, Chairman. My name's Nigel Matthews. I'm the Chair of North Mims District Greenbelt Society, and we are extremely concerned about the massive allocation of greenbelt land in the parish of North Mims, about the disproportionate impact of the proposed housing allocations upon the parish as a whole, and in particular at Welwyn Green and Belbar Brookmans Park. There appears to have been no consideration by the Council of the overwhelming effect that this would have on the existing communities in terms of the pressures on infrastructure, the provision of services, and the damage to the environment. Will the Council address these issues? If the Council proceeds with these proposals, will they ensure that all necessary infrastructure, including schools, roads, and medical services, are in place before the housing developments are functional? Thank you.
Thank you. Insofar as infrastructure is concerned, the Council has been in contact at various stages of the local plan process with key infrastructure providers, including Hertfordshire County Council on schools, planning and transport, and the NHS Clinical Commissioning Group on provision of health facilities. We have received recent updates from these bodies, and the updates will form part of a revised infrastructure delivery plan to be published shortly. The site selection background paper includes a section on infrastructure implications for every settlement likely to receive growth. The Council will use its very best endeavours, for example, through the use of planning obligations and/or CIL, to ensure that necessary infrastructure is delivered in a timely fashion to serve new development. However, the responsibility for delivering such infrastructure ultimately rests with the relevant providers. Okay, next we have Howard Dawson. Is Howard Dawson here?
Chairman, I'm going to deal with some matters of fact. I'll reserve my representations for the public consultation. My name's Howard Dawson. I'm a resident of Welwyn Green and a Regulation 19 party to the Welwyn Hatfield local plan examination. Over several years, I've made numerous representations regarding the local plan and the examination, predicting that the council would allocate a significant number of new housing sites in Welwyn Green, but would not make any significant site allocations in Brookmans Park. If the report presented this evening is approved, then my prediction of bias against Welwyn Green and favour towards Brookmans Park will have been proved to be true. In the last couple of weeks, it has emerged that the Council now proposes the allocation of 7 sites for residential development and 1 site for a new 2-form entry primary school in Welwyn Green. All of these sites are physically within or adjoining Welwyn Green and will become an inclusive part of the community. The total proposed additional housing provision in Welwyn Green is 592 dwellings. Proportionate growth would be 2.9% of allocated sites. It is now proposed to be 5%. Contrast that with Brookmans Park, which has 3% of the borough, but is going to take 1.1% of the burden. In Cuffley, the Council proposes 7 site allocations for 485 new homes on sites which are all within or adjoining Cuffley and will become an inclusive part of that community. In Brookmans Park, the Council proposes the allocation of just 3 sites within the village for a total of 149 new dwellings. However, in order to give the false impression of significant new housing sites in Brookmans Park, the Council has included 2 sites in Belbar for 404 new dwellings and a site to the west of the East Coast Main Line Railway for 300 homes. So whilst the Council is claiming that 853 new homes will be provided in Brookmans Park, in fact, 704 of those homes are not in Brookmans Park at all and will not be part of that community. This is a repeat of the trick used by the Council prior to 2006, when it claimed that BRP 7 for 100 new homes was in Brookmans Park, when in fact that site is in Little Heath, 1 mile southeast of Brookmans Park. It is also a fact that 2 of the sites proposed for 600 new homes, BRP 4 and BRP 34, are located beyond strong and permanent greenbelt boundaries of the A1000 and the East Coast Main Line Railway, which is in direct contradiction to government greenbelt policy, particularly when other more suitable sites are available within Brookmans Park but have not been allocated. BRP 4 was found to be high harm if released from the green belt, and it is located in the fragile gap between Hatfield, Welwyn Green and Potters Bar, where development would severely compromise the physical, visual and perceptual gap between Welwyn Green and Brookmans Park along road and rail transport corridors. It is obvious that BRP4 has only been proposed for allocation in order to locate new housing outside the village of Brookmans Park for political rather than planning reasons. It will be Welwyn Green and Water End that suffer the consequences of that political decision. I even predict that in the fullness of time, the Council will find a way to refuse development of BRP4 and BRP34, resulting in very little new development for Brookmans Park, while Welwyn Green shoulders the burden. The Council has now assessed Stanborough, Lemsford, Woolmer Green, Swanley Bar, Little Heath, Northaw and Newgate Street, all as individual settlements. Only Bell Bar and the rural site to the west of the railway line are lumped in with another settlement, Brookmans Park. The consequence of the Council's misrepresentation of housing sites in Brookmans Park will cause prejudice to the proposed public consultation and give a distorted picture of housing distribution within the borough. It is foreseeable that the Council and the existing residents of Brookmans Park will claim that their village is being overdeveloped compared to Welwyn Green and Cuffley, when in fact the opposite is true. Before any public consultation commences, would the Cabinet Planning and Parking Panel please confirm that it will amend its local plan additional site allocations to reflect the reality that the small village of Bell Bar will be required to accommodate 404 new dwellings, Brookmans Park will accommodate just 149 new dwellings, and BRP4, which is in open countryside to the west of the East Coast Mainline Railway, should be added to the rural sites allocations, not to Brookmans Park allocations. Thank you.
Thank you. BRP4 adjoins the village of Brookmans Park on its western boundary. BRP34, the transmitting station site, is a large site which lies to the east of Brookmans Park and Bell Bar. Should all of the sites around Bell Bar and Brookmans Park be taken forward, they will look, in the first instance, to the services and facilities in Brookmans Park. Hence, it is considered reasonable to present all relevant sites for these two settlements in one joint section. The forthcoming consultation document will show the relevant sites around Bell Bar and Brookmans Park, consistent with the approach taken in the 2019 consultation on the sites promoted through the call for sites. Thank you. And next we have Councillor Jackie Bolton of North Mims Parish Council.
Thank you. Good evening. Would the Council please explain how, when considering the Greenbelt sites around Brookmans Park, Welwyn Green and Little Heath, they have considered the cumulative impact of the removal of so much land from the Greenbelt? Further, would the Council demonstrate why it has chosen sites that will lead to coalescence of the villages of Brookmans Park and Welwyn Green and change the character of two rural villages into a small town? And finally, why has it completely ignored, it being the Council, completely ignored the previous responses which showed overwhelming objections to housing on these Greenbelt sites? Thank you.
Thank you. The Green Gap Assessment 2019 reviewed land between settlements, the role that gaps play in maintaining settlement pattern and character, and the impact that development may have on that role. The assessment considered how the draft site allocations and promoted sites in the gaps would affect settlement separation and recommends the identification of a number of policy gap areas and mitigation measures to offset any erosion of these gaps. The proposed allocations would not result in the coalescence of Brookmans Park and Welwyn Green. A gap of 402 metres would remain if both WEG6 and BRP12A were to be allocated. This would be wider than the gap between most of the settlements in the northern parts of the borough, and the settlements would remain separate by the railway embankment, woodland and intervening open land. The level of growth proposed at Welwyn Green, which is 5% of all proposed housing growth in the borough, and Belbar Brookmans Park, 7.2%, is not sufficient to deliver the full range of services and facilities that are characteristic of those found in the borough's towns. Both villages will remain defined as large, excluded villages in the settlement hierarchy, with Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City continuing to be defined as the borough's two towns. Significant levels of objections have been raised to the release of greenbelt sites for housing throughout the various stages of consultation on the emerging local plan. However, the council has a duty to prepare a local plan, and in doing so must demonstrate how it will meet the objectively assessed need for housing in full. Insufficient land supply exists within the borough's urban areas. A case of exceptional circumstances exists to release land from the greenbelt. The council is seeking to minimise the harm to the greenbelt to the lowest possible extent, whilst being mindful of the need to address the need for housing and have a plan that is found sound. Next, we have Councillor Bernard Sarson on behalf of Norfolk and Cuffley Parish Council. Bernard here.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. I bring apologies from the councillors of Northall and Cuffley, as they actually have a full council meeting tonight, and they've asked me to ask the question. What steps are being taken by Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council to guarantee that the strategic environmental assessment sustainability appraisal takes full account of all the cumulative and synergistic effects of plans, policy and programmes of neighbouring authorities, included committed and proposed development in Brookmans Park and Enfield, and the A10 clean air zone when considering the impact on traffic and air quality in Cuffley? Thank you.
Thank you. Cumulative effects, including synergistic effects, are considered in the cumulative effects section of the Sustainability Appraisal, Chapter 6 of the 2016 report. This considers the likely effects of the plan as a whole against the likely future baseline. The SA addendum refers to the assessment of increased growth at paragraph 6.8, which it states does not change the cumulative effects identified in the 2016 SA. It will be reviewed and updated if necessary in the SA Addendum 2020 once there is certainty on the proposed updates to the plan. Appendix 3 and Chapter 3 of the 2016 SA report discuss the relationship of the plan with other plans and programmes, which has been used to inform the future baseline against which the policies and site options are assessed. By its very nature, the Habitats Regulations assessments considers cumulative effects. It summarises planned growth in surrounding authorities, Appendix 3 of 2016 HRA, and updated 2020 HRA, and the HRA has informed the SA with regards to effects on biodiversity. LUC's approach to SA, including consideration of cumulative effects, is in line with that used across the industry and has been tested successfully at many examinations. Next, we have Russell Hager. Is Russell here? Would you like to speak next week instead? Next week, you can speak next week. That is absolutely fine. Well, I've only got one copy. This is the challenge. It's absolutely your choice. Okay, well, go for it. Yeah. We'll get you the text. Sorry, you need to press the button for the mic. Perfect.
Okay. So Russell Hagger, representing the Welwyn Planning and Amenity Group. We believe that there are substantial errors in the sustainability appraisal sections in the site selection assessments for sites Well 1, Well 2, Well 6 and Well 15. Will the Council correct the appraisals accordingly and then reconsider these 4 sites' suitability for inclusion in options 1, 2, 3 and 4? There is a... Do you want to read out the lengthy text, or do the councillors have in front of it?
All the councillors have the text, so if you want, I can give you an answer.
Well, for the benefit of the audience who are present, I'll try and summarise more quickly. I've got 4 lengthy paragraphs, which I'm sure will be in the transcript. But essentially, we're challenging the claims that the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from transport and helping to reduce or avoid air pollution, which are claimed to arise from there being plenty of bus stops within 400 metres of the housing development. Those bus stops don't actually exist. That's the gist of the bulk of it. So, over to you.
Thank you. And all of the questions and the answers will be available online as well. So, consultation on the suitability of these sites for development has taken place with the Highways team at Herts County Council, the Education team at Herts County Council, the Environment Agency, Affinity Water, and the Archaeology team at the Herts County Council, none of whom have raised any concerns related to the principle of the allocation of these sites for development. The consultation event will allow for comments to be submitted on the addendum to the Sustainability Appraisal 2020 and whether this is legally compliant for this stage of plan making. It is recommended that your comments are submitted during the consultation period. The Council's specialist sustainability appraisal consultants will be asked to consider all of the comments received on the sustainability appraisal at the end of the consultation process. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Welwyn Planning and Amenity Group, but there is no name here. Okay. Would you like to ask it next week? That's fine. Okay. Okay.
Sites Well 1, Well 2, Well 6 and Well 15 will all require improved vehicular access from the Codicott Road. The Site Selection Background Paper 2019 notes that the current road and bridge will need to be widened to cope with the road traffic from those sites, and that a third-party landowner has indicated a willingness to work with the site promoters to achieve this. Can you confirm whether or not this third-party landowner is Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council, and whether the land for these improvements will come from the Singlers Marsh plot, and the amount of commercial benefit that the landowner would receive from the site promoters or others in return for the use of Singlers Marsh land? Finally, please inform us what studies have been carried out to estimate the effect of noise and emissions produced by the several hundred extra cars daily on the ecology of Singlers Marsh. Given that Singlers Marsh is a designated local nature reserve in WHBC's own management plan, how is any development of this valuable public amenity permissible?
Thank you. An area of land within Singlers Marsh would be required to deliver highway widening of WEL1, WEL2, or Well 2, Well 6, and Well 15 were selected. The third-party landowner of Singlers Marsh is Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council. No decision or agreement to sell the land or widen the bridge has been entered into at this stage. No negotiations have taken place in respect of a possible commercial benefit Only a willingness to enter into a memorandum of understanding has been initially indicated if the site is taken forward for development. No concerns have been raised by wildlife bodies in respect of the possible impacts on Singler's Marsh, and no evidence studies have been carried out. Okay, thank you. So that brings to an end our public questions. We also said that we would allow councillors who are not members of the panel to also ask questions or make comments. We had 3 councillors who requested to speak. Of those 3 councillors, one has since withdrawn that request, so we have 2 more. And the first is Councillor Malcolm Cowan. Over
there. Speak from here. Okay, thank you very much. Right, producing a plan, a local plan, has taken this council longer than the whole of the Second World War. And the cost must be many millions of pounds, not dissimilar to many other districts up and down the country. I wonder if the people who dreamt up the process still think this is the best use of so much resource, so much time, or is there a better way? Back in 2008, Gascoigne Cecil ran a charrette to look at how best to cope with growth in the county. A new garden city came out extremely well in that assessment, but the council did not really engage with the charrette and ignored the conclusions. If they had taken it on at that time, it could well have been playing a significant part in our housing numbers now and avoiding some of the agony. I also note how much lower some nearby Herts Council's objective assessment of housing need is, their targets, should we have challenged ours more vigorously. One site that gives me particular concern is in my ward, is PEA 06 on Bridge Road East, the bagel factory. Although the planned trajectory for housing says it will be developed in the next 2 to 3 years, the company who have recently moved in has a lease for the next 5 years and plan to expand their labour force. I'd also query the promise that's in the documents that there'd be up to 200 replacement jobs on site, when each one would only have 7 or 8 square metres each to work in. I don't think that's practical. If you adopt this site as part of the plan, you risk non-delivery. You risk the end of manufacturing on this site in an employment area. And by using the projected numbers that are in the parallel planning application, you would be de facto giving the green light to the application, which is for 7-storey blocks of flats in a low-rise area. I urge you to withdraw this site. I'd also remind members that only a few months ago we voted without being able to commit the council, but we voted not to support the ski slope being allocated for housing, and I'd ask members to respect that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have Bernard again.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak on behalf of the residents of the parish of Northaw and Cuffley. The residents do understand that new homes are needed, and they wish to help and have some local support for development. They appreciate that some housings would have to be built on green belt. There are 4 sites I wish to speak about. Firstly, Cuff 7/HS30, 75 homes, and Cuff 12, HS29, 73 homes. Both of these sites in the parish are the only sites in the 2016 local plan and the 2019 local plan proposed for development that have high harm on the green belt. I wonder why these have appeared again now. The 2 other sites I wish to mention in the parish are PB1 and NOR1. Together, these sites can deliver more housing and have much less harm on the green belt. PB1, the developer has suggested 4,000 plus homes, but we all know this would be high harm on the green belt. But looking at the site, there could be approximately room for 180 homes, which may be built with much less harm to the green belt. nor 1. This site is designated as Greenbelt, but is already used for light industrial. The local residents have complained on many occasions that the road where this industrial site is frequently blocked by large lorries delivering to the site. There are houses opposite this site, and residents say they would prefer housing to industrial. Perhaps we should listen to residents. These are the people who live in the area. I know officers have worked very hard on this local plan, but could I ask the officers via this meeting to revisit again all 4 sites and give their justification to the residents for their decision? Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 7, local plan proposed alterations. Colin? Can we have the presentation up?
Thank you. As you know, we have submitted a local plan for 12,000 homes, and that has been at examination for a number of years. The inspector is concerned that it doesn't meet the objective need for housing. As part of that process, we have re-reviewed that and concluded, and the inspector has also concluded, it remains at 800 homes a year, and therefore the need for the newly agreed plan period is 16,000 homes in the period 2016 to 2036. As part of the exam, we have also carried out a Stage 3 Greenbelt study, which I'll talk about as part of this presentation. We have done a call for sites consultation to find out if there are any new sites and received 144 new and re-promoted sites. And then we consulted on those and received over 10,000 representations. The results of that consultation was, as you see, 10,249 responses plus 4 petitions. 87% of those comments were objecting to sites, 4% were supportive, and 9 were either way. The main issues raised in that were harm to the Greenbelt, harm to the environment, heritage, character of areas, concerns about infrastructure capacity, and concerns about air quality particularly. Only 1 site received no comments, and only 3 sites received no objections listed there. So you will see the level of interest and concern about the choice we have to make. As a result of that, officers have analysed all of those sites, both individually and cumulatively. Firstly, through a housing and employment land availability assessment and a sieving exercise to weed out sites that we have judged through a methodology wouldn't come forward, and then looking at suitability, development potential, availability, achievability. Those that pass those then go into a site selection background paper, and you will see all of that was published, and I'll talk about the results of that site selection background paper. As part of the weighing up exercise, officers have tested 2 infrastructure implications. One which looks at releasing employment land in order to try and protect Greenbelt land, and one which looks more at protecting employment land and the necessity to release more Greenbelt land. And you will see the sort of numbers that yielded. We've also looked at 4 sustainability options, various scenarios again: avoid high harm to the Greenbelt, protect employment land, max out everything that's been promoted, and the preferred strategy, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight. Government policies say that the plan and the plan-making process that leads to it must be demonstrably sound, and that's what the inspector has been testing us at examination for the last 3 years. If the plan can't meet the objective assessed need for housing, then there must be sound reasons for not doing this. The inspector said at the beginning of the exam that, there is a housing crisis, and if he lets us off and everyone else is let off around the southeast, then the housing crisis perpetuates. And so far, the inspector thinks there is insufficient justification for the 12,000 we submitted, hence the new Greenbelt review and the other work we've done. That sits alongside the MPPF, which attaches great importance to the Greenbelt, and it seeks to prevent urban sprawl by keeping the land permanently open, and that is one of the challenges I'm sure you've all encountered and we will continue to encounter. There's also a legal duty to seek to achieve sustainable patterns of development, so choices that make sense in terms of what's here and what might be here in the future. On the basis of all that, we have identified a preferred strategy, which to officers' mind virtually achieves the objective assessed need for housing. It is only 48 homes short of that 16,000 number. It achieves a good balance between housing and employment land, so there continue to be homes and workers and jobs at a reasonable balance, similar to what we have at the moment. It selects the lowest harm greenbelt sites, and it does not select more sites than is necessary to reach that OAN. As you'll see, it delivers 15,952 homes. It selects 36 out of those 144 promoted sites. It has an updated position on completions, commitments and windfalls since we last did that. It seeks to maximise urban sites. It does keep the sites already in the submitted plan, plus it accepts there might be some scope to increase capacity on those sites. It allocates some new employment land, or proposes to rather, and it proposes the release of some new greenbelt sites, but no new high harm sites. The submitted plan had provision for 17,000 jobs. The inspector has challenged us on a couple of occasions on the balance between jobs and homes and making sure we're getting that right. And you'll see as part of the plan we are proposing new employment land, as well as a separate process to bring in an Article 4 direction to help us resist the loss of more office space. And that combination of activities we think achieves a good balance between homes and jobs. What I'm about to show you is a series of maps, settlement level, showing the sites. Now, the sites already in the plan are shown in purple. All of the newly promoted sites that passed that HELA Stage 2 process and made it into the site selection background paper are in red. And those that we have selected in our preferred strategy then have a yellow circle around them. We identify the capacity of each site based upon the best available information, but I would say come planning application stage for whatever sites are allocated, there is always scope for numbers to go up or down based upon more detailed information available at that time, but it is our best information at this stage. And it also identifies the greenbelt harm rating of each site. So you'll see the maps there. The map on the left shows all the purple sites in the local plan and all the red sites that we have considered. And then the map on the right shows the greenbelt harm results from our Stage 3 study. So, Woolmer Green, we have sites already in the plan. So HS15 is the larger purple site, and the NTEC site was one on appeal last year, I believe it was. We have also selected WGR3, southern boundary of Nebworth, but we are proposing that it only be built out to the existing edge of Nebworth village, so that it doesn't extend any further into the greenbelt than other development already does. And then we've identified the Marshall site. That's an urban site, currently employment land. So that's another 59 dwellings for Woolmer Green. We haven't selected any new sites in Oaklands and Mardley Heath. We have selected 4 new sites in Welwyn on top of those purple sites you can already see. They are all in the moderate high harm category. And as you've heard through the question, they are all accessed via the Singlers Marsh Road, which we believe would require widening of that bridge. There are no new sites selected for Digswell. There's 1 new site for Lemsford. We think that should be low density for 27 units. That is a moderate greenbelt harm site. We're also proposing that Lemsford should be taken out of the greenbelt, and there is a boundary set out in the Healer document. Welwyn Garden City, you can see there are already 4,400 odd units already in the submitted plan. That includes HS2 for 300 units, which you'll see on the southern side of the town. That is in the moderate high harm category, and Birchill Garden Suburb. We're also proposing an extra 100 units in Birchill Garden Suburb, also a moderate high harm site. We have proposed 75 new homes to the north of the Panzanger site that got outline planning permission last year. Now, we have since had conversations with the landowner since we published that report, and we do now actually believe that across the whole site, that which already has outline permission, and the site to the north that we've selected, that it could accommodate a total of 815. So that's an extra 90 on what we've set out there. So something you may like to consider. And you'll be aware that we also have the Gosling site in the submitted plan. As Councillor Cowan said, there was a council motion that that site be reconsidered as part of this debate, so I presume you'll do so as part of your conversations. I should also say that at the beginning of this week, we had a pre-application meeting with the two landowners of the Wheat Quarter site. They are happy for me to tell you that they are together looking to submit planning applications to increase the number of units on that site, potentially by as many as 700 to 900 extra units. That will involve additional heights to those buildings. Officers have done no testing of that yet, so I can't tell you what might be possible given the visual, heritage, heights, car parking, transport, education, healthcare, etc. issues that would need to be considered. But it again is something you might like to consider as part of this debate, and there may be some way we can insert something into a consultation document while we carry on pre-application discussions with those landowners. Stanborough Village, we have proposed 3 sites there. STL9, the largest of those for 90 units in the moderate category, and then 2 much smaller sites in the low category. And again, we're proposing to take the village out of the greenbelt, and there is a proposed boundary in the Healer report. Nothing selected for Essendon. In Hatfield, you'll see we already have 2,285 in the plan, which includes SL11 to the south for 120, which is in the moderate to high category, and HAT1 to the northwest of the town for, we think, 1,650. We believe an extra 100 units could go into that site, and that is a combination of moderate, moderate high, and high harm greenbelt. The area we've circled is high harm greenbelt, and slightly beyond that we're proposing that that be the playing fields for the schools, so that purple area to the north wouldn't be developed in any way. For Welham Green, we have selected a number of sites in addition to those purple sites you can see, adding up to a total of 500 new homes plus a new primary school on WEG 17. And you will note that many of those sites are in the moderate category. One is in the moderate high category, and the primary school site is in the high harm category. But we think in order to provide the associated infrastructure with those sites, it is appropriate to identify a high harm site. We also anticipate a new secondary school at New Barnfield. For Brookmans Park, we have HS22 already in the plan for 250 homes. That also is a high harm category. We believe an extra 50 units could go in there. And then we've selected 3 new sites to the northwest and to the northeast. 2 in the moderate high category and 1 in the moderate category. adding up to a total of 529 new homes. No new sites proposed for Swanley Bar. One new site proposed for Little Heath, 36 units on a moderate to low site, and we would only propose to develop the south side of that site at a low density and keep the north protected from development. We haven't selected BP1 to the east of Potters Bar. We haven't selected anything in Northaw. We haven't selected anything in Newgate Street. We propose the continuation of the sites already selected for Cuffley and the addition of Cuff 15 for 176 units in the moderate high category. We also propose the retention of Simonside Village, which is in the moderate high category, and Barbourville, you'll notice, in the very high category for 4 gypsy pitches. All of that results in the preferred strategy, as you can see. So the completions, the commitments and the windfalls assumptions updated, the existing allocations in the plan, plus the additional capacity where there are permissions or applications in that we will believe will progress, plus additional capacity from other modifications. The new sites I've just run through add up to just over 3,000 homes, all of which gives us a total of just under the 16,000, and that equates to 1,300 new urban sites and 1,719 new greenbelt sites, and a split of about 43 to 57%. That would leave 74% of the borough remaining in the greenbelt. For your debate, as you may wish, just to let you know, that reiterates the completions, the commitments, the windfall categories, the submitted sites and the additional changes that might be made, the urban sites that we believe are available, and then you'll see moderate sites that were promoted that we believe are suitable add up to 688, so there are choices there. Moderate high harm sites found suitable add up to 1,098, and high harm sites found suitable add up to 1,300. We haven't selected all of those, as I've just explained, but they are all technically available, having passed through the site selection paper. And if you looked at the high harm sites that are already in the submission plan, taking those out would reduce the numbers by 500. We had the stage 6 hearing session just before Christmas, and as a result of that, the inspector issued the following statement that unless there are sound planning reasons for doing so, then he expects us to seek to meet the full objectively assessed need for housing. And on that basis, the best professional advice I can offer is the closer the target is to that OAN of 16,000 homes, the greater the likelihood that the plan will be found sound. To highlight the risks of all of this, there is the potential that removing some of the sites may make it more difficult to deliver new infrastructure to meet the needs of the growing community. There is a risk that the inspector suspends the examination as a result of whatever decision is made. There is a risk the inspector finds the plan unsound, either straight away or through further examinations, hearing sessions. There's a risk that the government could instruct another body to prepare our plan if it doesn't feel we're doing that job. There is the ongoing risk of a lack of 5-year housing land supply, which makes it harder to resist proposals for brownfield sites and employment land at the moment, and may in time make it more difficult to start resisting speculative greenbelt applications, and that may lead to the risk of planning by appeal and appeal costs. On the basis of all of this, we propose to have tonight's debate to decide on that debate on the 29th of January, next Wednesday, and then whatever is agreed will proceed to Cabinet the following night. If that is agreed, it will go out for public consultation no later than those dates, 10th of Feb to the 22nd of March. We have hearing sessions scheduled for the south side of Birchall Garden Suburb and Simonside early March. We will be analysing all of the representations we get to the consultation alongside that. The inspector has indicated that based upon what is decided by this panel and Cabinet in the coming week or so, he will use that to issue his draft inspector's hearing questions. We will then return to this panel in late May to report on the responses to the consultation, with the expectation that this panel and then council decides on what to submit to the examination, and then those hearing sessions will take place in June. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Colin. We're now going to move into the debate, and we will be using the buttons by your microphones. So can I get that back up on my screen, please? And whilst that happens, just to note a few things. Today, we will aim for a hard stop at 10 p.m. at the latest. So can all of the members try to keep your points as succinct as is possible. It's very clear that we're going to hear, or very likely that we're going to hear about many of the things that you do not like. Highly unlikely that we will hear much about things that you may like about this plan. But what would be extremely useful is if you are also able to provide solutions, particularly around the areas that you wish to discuss. And if the officers can answer the questions today, I'm sure they will. And we want to make sure that between now and the 29th, the officers have as much of your suggestions as possible, so that by the time we come back, hopefully we have some resolutions. Okay, first up we have Sunny.
Thank you. There are some general points I want to make, but when we first started this meeting, this committee meeting, we said that we have to think of the whole borough as a whole. But I wasn't voted by the residents of Brooklands Park or Hatfield East. I was voted by Welwyn West. And so as a consequence, I have no shame in representing the people who voted for me, because ultimately that is what I'm answerable to. I am not a politician. I don't have to make grand gestures to the national, international. I purely have to represent the people of Welwyn West. And if I could just bring up the Welwyn West proposed sites. Is that possible to do? If not, I can briefly talk about it.
We can.
I mean, the first thing that strikes me of the whole thing is it's all centred around a village. And it is a village. That will affect a nature reserve. I can't even begin to say how that is sound in any shape or form. And what is a sound plan by an inspector I've never met, never spoke to, probably doesn't live here? And, you know, if you were to zoom out more, in the last 5 years, there have been 300 new developments. I have a conflict of interest. I live in Wilshire Park, which is a new development of 209 houses, started in 2016. There's near the roundabout near Junction 6. There was a new development there a few years before that. A small village has already taken its fair share. And I know there will be councillors on the opposition and people say, well, you know, villages should have more. But they are villages. They are not for these sort of things. And what sort of houses are going to be built on them? Yes, there is a housing crisis, mostly because it's in London and because the prices of houses are high. You know, I have not yet seen any sort of real, you know, affordable housing in the truest sense of the form. We can come on to council housing at another time. I think this is unsound. I think moderate to high is bad. You know, we can debate moderate, but moderate to high greenbelt is not what should be acceptable here. And then we also, on top of that, seem to declare a climate emergency. I'd like to see what assessment was done on that for all these housing, because it's not carbon neutral. You cannot build any of these houses that are carbon neutral. And on a more global level, 16,000 houses he's decided that requires. Are there really 16,000 plus people moving to this area in the next 20 years? Because I don't think that many people moved in the previous 20 years, you know? And if they do move here, where are they going to work? Most of them in London or other areas. We've already had much debate on the transport of this area. I find it strange, the stage 6 listening session, because I don't think this planning officer has listened to anything. And we get these veiled threats that if this is an unsound plan, it'll be taken out of your hands. And they use places like St Albans. See what they did. They build more houses. That is unacceptable. And I'd hope that the county councillors that sit there would also find this unacceptable. We have to listen to our residents. 80-something% did not like it. I think Brexit was significantly less than that percentage of 52-48. And see what happened. When you don't listen to your residents, the people who elect you to represent them, then you have a problem. And it is not democracy, it is essential some sort of government policy. And my final point is, this government policy was a different government. I believe we have an MP who sits now in the cabinet. I am pretty sure he will listen after his recent election to some sort of effort to that. That's about it.
Okay, thank you, Sonny. On message as always. Who do we have next? Anyone else? Councillor Quinton.
Okay, thank you. There are a few points with Sonny has made which I would agree with. I think government policy is wrong, but we have to live with it as it is at the moment. Whether that changes within the next 5 years, I don't know. Unlike Sonny, I would like to think that we are all considering how our panel here can decide the best thing for the whole of Welwyn Hatfield Borough, not just for individual areas. I want to speak for the Liberal Democrat group here. We have objections to not only some of the sites which are in this new selection, but also to some of the sites that have been in the submitted plan already. We therefore can't agree with any of the options proposed, simply because there are sites that we do not feel are reasonable to put into the local plan altogether. I can go through those sites, but as Malcolm Karen has already said, we don't really believe that the Gosling site, the ski slope, should be removed because it is a facility that's being used. We have a lot of concerns with the site in Pear Tree, PA 106, which, as he said, is currently an employment site. We have bigger problems, I think, in some of the strategic sites. Simon's Hyde, for instance, we don't feel is a sustainable option. There are varying reasons for all of these sites, all of which we think the council has not taken enough heed of. Another site we would object to would be Hat 11, simply because it breaches the Greenbelt boundary and the clear-cut margin of Hatfield as it stands. Personally, as a ward councillor for Panshanger, I am alarmed that they are proposing another 90 houses in that site. Residents have already accepted that the airfield as it existed is gone and that 650 homes will have to be built there. However, I think we would strongly object to the inclusion of any more houses beyond that and any houses within the Greenbelt section of that allocation, simply because the space that is available for leisure land for people in that area is already limited. There are a lot of flats, blocks of flats in the Holden's part of Panshanger, and a lot of people use the space around there for walking dogs, for playing football. If you remove all that space, people have nowhere for health reasons, mental health, physical health, to enjoy the countryside. And I know you say it's only 75 houses, but as Colin said, once you take it out of the green belt, there are no real guarantees that it won't go through for more in planning. And I think we need to retain that as a green corridor link. It was promised as a green corridor link between the Mimram Valley and Panshanger Park. I will leave my colleague Paul to discuss what the objections we also have around Welwyn Green.
Thank you very much, Jane. Colin, Sue, do you want to address those points? Jane's points, not Sonny's, because Sonny's points were for people that are not in here. I was talking about policy, Brexit. I mean, what else did you talk about? You used the word global, so we'll take that outside of this meeting and we'll see if we can write to Grant again, maybe for you. All right.
I'll try and come back on those. The concept of a garden city elsewhere, we do have a duty to go through the duty to cooperate with adjoining authorities. We've had conversations about whether any of those authorities could meet our need, and none feel they are able, in the same way that we've been asked that question of them and we haven't felt able to meet their needs. So that hasn't yielded a solution. I'm aware that there was the council motion to save Gosling. You'll be aware that a sports strategy was taken through a SOSC meeting last week, and that has got a recommendation in it that a feasibility study and master plan study be prepared to look at the totality of Gosling Sports Park. On that basis, you may wish to look at the assumptions for that site and see if a master plan might be a way of yielding a satisfactory solution that hopefully delivers housing and also delivers future sporting needs in alignment with that strategy. Simon's side, as is already noted, is in the submitted plan, and we continue to believe that the evidence is there to support it and that it can be made to be a sustainable village. At 11, again, our Greenbelt and other evidence supports the principle that it is acceptable to build there. It also provides a primary school, so we believe it has sustainability merits in that regard. In terms of Panzanger, we believe that the scheme can be designed such that any development to the north is at a lower density that respects its location on the edge of the valley and the settlement on the other side of the valley, and also that space can be provided, open space, walking routes, etc., through the valley, so we can keep that opportunity for existing residents in that part of the town and for new residents as well.
Glyn?
Thank you, Chair. Seems like a bit of a grim start, I'd have to admit. But I mean, firstly, what I'd like to say, and nobody here seems to have said it at the moment, is that the work that's gone into producing this new set of draft papers, over 1,200 odd pages, is a phenomenal piece of work. Whether you actually like the content or disagree with the content, and believe me, lots of people here tonight obviously disagree with a lot of the content in there, but you have to actually appreciate that that was an awful lot of work. And I am thankful to Colin and his team for bringing that forward, and I do recognise exactly what went into that, and a lot of blood, sweat and tears over the time. So yeah, I for one do recognise that and would like to say that. However, it doesn't come without criticism. Doesn't come without criticism. There's an awful lot of employment land which has been lost recently through the office blocks being converted, and that's really hit us hard over the years. And we find ourselves, I think, at a stage where, as much as the work we were trying to do over the years to account for all this, we were up against, all of a sudden, government meddling with us again when we're supposed to be our local plan, and taking that part away from us, which just puts a lot more strain upon this community. So, whilst that's disappeared, and we struggled on, we managed to find a way, hopefully, around that, and hopefully things will stabilise a bit better for us. But we're already at a negative. We're already coming back. We're on the back foot. Well, then we come up against an inspector, and I'll echo some of the words that Sonny said here, who isn't from around this area and is of the mind that we should be harming our greenbelt, and that's fundamentally wrong. There's no way we should be standing here or sitting here, as I do in my case, agreeing with him. But we did submit a local plan before, which we couldn't quite justify the numbers of where we got it from, and that was an own goal by us, unfortunately. So now we've got to pick the pieces up, and we've got to start again. I look through, and before we even get into individual sites, I'd just like to address a lot of the infrastructure. I have massive issues with infrastructure across the whole of the local plan. when you talk about, we'll talk about schools, for instance, to start with. Throughout the proposals here in the drafts, there's a lot of wording about if there seems to be justified a need to increase it by one more FE here or one more FE there, we'll do it. A lot of the school places will have to be met by people travelling across the borough because we can't provide enough, because there won't be enough flexibility within the schools that are being built. They may build an 8 FE secondary school, but it might be a 10 FE. Well, why not? Let's just say let's build the 10 FE, because then we've got more capacity for in the future when things get problematic and they expand. Then we've already got that capacity there, rather than building the 8 FE and then in 10 years down the line we discover that we actually are struggling for school places again, like we are at the moment. Because over the years, and I had this conversation in 2016, over the last 30 years, Welwyn Hatfield, the county council has closed obscene amounts of schools in our area and placed us under huge problems and issues. Anybody with a child will understand that, that's in this room or indeed watching. To get a school place, to get a local primary school place is difficult, and to get a secondary school place of your choosing is more than difficult. So I really think we need to pressure the county council into saying, actually, we can't be doing the wishy-washy commitments that are currently in the draft. We need to have firm commitments that they will deliver to the maximum potential they possibly can in these schools and these form entries. And the last thing, actually, before I move on off schools, is that some of the proposals are for 3 form entries for primary schools. That, I don't know where we keep growing our primary schools and how that seems to be a solution in anybody's mind. Please, anybody in this room, think back to when you were small and you moved up from a primary school to a secondary school and there was 1 million people around you and how that made you feel. Well, all of a sudden, then you put your mind back to when you're 6 or 5 or 6 starting primary school, and all of a sudden you've got that almost volume of people knocking around you. That's not schooling. And when the schools increase by a form entry, they don't suddenly get brand new lunchrooms built for them. It's just classrooms built. So you're going to have children. Some children might be happy with not going to lunch and they'll quickly ram a sandwich down and go and play football. But equally, you've got the other children there, which will spend their 45 minutes to an hour sat there trying to eat their sandwich, chatting with their mates. They're not going to have that. They're going to be filed in and out. It's going to be like robots. That's not good on our children either. We need to address these issues, and we need to address these with county now. Because I absolutely don't agree. Sorry, Chair, I'll move on. All right. Transport. Transport, again, it baffles me, and I feel that sometimes that the county council departments just don't want to say, we don't agree with the local plan as it stands. If you take Simon's Hyde, you take the HAT 1, which is, well, I think it's SGS 5, and you take the Stamborough area. Let's just take Simon's Hyde, for instance. Just alone, Simon's Hyde, it's over 1,000 homes. Most houses nowadays have 2 cars, but let's just say they all had 1 or slightly less than 1 car. It's 1,000 new cars. Let's just say out of them 1,000 new cars, 800 of them, after they've done the school run, are going to go and travel into London. So they're going to drive to a train station, park somewhere in the borough, because we have nowhere to park anymore. All of a sudden, you have 800 cars arriving down Cooper's Green Lane to the roundabout. And all we're doing is minor modifications at Cooper's Green Lane roundabout to accommodate it. If anybody in the local area has ever driven down Cooper's Green Lane in the morning, you will struggle to get into Welwyn Garden City in a timely fashion. If cars move across that roundabout as it stands at even 10 cars a minute, the queues are it's just going to gridlock us around the area. That's not sustainable. Even if you just take Simon's Hyde out of it, you're still talking about a huge volume of cars from HAT 1. They probably go a different way. They could run through. And you're still talking another 45 to 90 cars coming out of Stamborough. That we need to go back to highways and we need to get that properly addressed, because I'm not a professional, but I can see that the numbers do not stack up when it comes to transport. Areas.
Sorry, Glyn, would you mind if we address those 2
You can
points?
answer, you can address some of
first?
them points, no problem at all, Chair.
Colin, Sue?
I think, as we said, we've been working very closely with all the infrastructure providers, the statutory bodies we have to engage with, and that's notably the County Council in its role as highways and education. We've had confirmation from them that they believe that what we are proposing is deliverable. It can be workable, that those improvements can be delivered as part of future planning applications. I know that across the county they are looking more favourably at 3FE primary schools, and I'm sure they are taking account of the welfare of children in those schools as part of the design, because that will be one of the responsibilities they have. But it's certainly seen as part of the solution to, you know, extra housing need across the county and ways of delivering schools in urban areas on smaller sites. So that's something we've heard from them. We've also been working with them closely in terms of highways, and what they've said based on their local transport plan for LTP4 and the presumption of moving more towards sustainable transport, walking and cycling, they believe that these sites can be delivered taking account of those policies and incorporating them into their design. And if they are selected and go forward, then come design and master planning and planning application stage, we would expect to work with landowners to secure those commitments, contributions, improvements as necessary, and they would all come before the Development Management Committee for ratification.
Glyn?
Just wait for me to jump.
We'll come back to Glyn.
I'm there, Chair. Don't run away too quick. Okay, so thank you for that, Colin. I'm sure that the County Council took account of primary school children when they shut the schools in the first place, and then shoehorned them into 2FE schools afterwards when they got it wrong. And now we're going to go for 3FE. So your faith in them is better than mine. In particular, on the transport issue, I did choose the Cooper's Green Lane roundabout because there is very little we can do actually when it comes down, when it comes to that road to improve that. So that is going to be a nightmare, no matter the minor improvement we may put in. However, I digress. We'll move on. I've very much been against the Simonside proposal from I've been very vocal about that over the years. I don't believe that's a sustainable development, not at all. I voted against it in 2016, and I'll do what I can to not see that in the plan ever again. It's a huge blight in the landscape. You've got, it's not just, we're not talking about a small parcel of land in the Greenbelt, you're talking about a huge blight, which anywhere in Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield, you'll be able to see it. It will overlook Hatfield House, which is ironic, because if you overlook Hatfield House, you're not allowed to actually build the development. But as they own the land, they can get around this and they'll accept the fact that they're overlooked by it. So I just massively disagree with that site as well. Also, when it comes to Birchall Garden suburbs, the nature reserve, I would like to see a much wider boundary installed somewhere around the nature reserve there to protect it. The problem with houses going around, we might not think there's going to be too much issue, but people own cats, and I don't mind cats in the slightest. I'm not necessarily against cats per se. There's enough of them on the internet, but cats do like smaller wildlife, and in and around the nature reserve, that's that can't be very good for our local areas. I've got more to say. I'll let somebody else speak. I feel I've spoken far too long. I'll just say one more thing, Sonny. No Way to 10K, championed by Grant Shapps, local plan. Also, somebody else.
Thank you, Glyn.
Another councillor, I believe.
Thank you very much for that. You're doing so well, Glyn. Birchall Garden suburb, and Simon Side. Sue, do you want to answer that?
Yes. In terms of virtual garden suburb and the protection for the nature reserve, there are proposals in the policy objectives, requires a buffer around the nature reserve to protect it. In accordance with Natural England guidance, there would be a 15-metre buffer along the woodland edge, which is in keeping with their requirements. And then the grass part of the nature reserve, that's where the green corridor would come through the site, so that would be protected through the grass, through the green corridor.
What bit would that be?
Well, the policy itself doesn't prescribe that. What's been discussed at hearing sessions is a green corridor with width of around about 100 metres.
Sorry, Lynn, would you be comfortable with that? Okay, all right. Worth a try. Okay, Councillor Paul Sikowski. No, I'm the chair. You're next.
Oh,
okay.
I defer to your expertise on this. I have to say at the start that I fully agree with Glyn in terms of the amount of work and effort that's been put into this, because I think officers have put an awful lot of effort and time and their lives really into putting this plan together, and I do recognise it as being a really quality piece of work. However, and there is always a however, isn't it? The issue for me, it comes back to our understanding of what the inspector has said to us as a starting point. Okay. Because I was at the inspector's, at the examination in public, when the inspector said that your OAN should not be 12,400 or whatever it was at the time, it needs to be more than that. And you cannot justify your local plan number of 12,000. And I took his next statement as being the critical bit, because you have provided insufficient evidence that there is an impact on the green belt sufficient to mean that you don't hit that OAN. What I took from that was we needed to provide robust and substantive evidence to say that the harm to the green belt is too much, and therefore we needed to provide that evidence. And that's what I understood his direction to do the stage 3 green belt study to be. Now, what the planning team seem to have taken from that is go hit the OAN, okay? Because 48 short of the OAN is effectively hitting the OAN, okay? For me, planning balance means balancing the harm versus the need. In this instance, the harm to the green belt against the need for housing. And I don't see a 99.7% side on housing and a 0.3% side on greenbelt as being an appropriate balance. I hesitate to say where that balance should be, okay? I think that ought to fall out of the data. And I think the evidence that we got would allow us to have a number that fell out of the data, and that's the way round I would have done it. But we are where we are. We have what the document's in front of us. It is one of the issues, however, that means that I, along with my group, won't be able to support the options that are presented to us. When it comes to Welwyn Green itself, I do notice that it's a well over a 30% increase in dwellings in the contiguous village. It's a really substantial change to a village environment, okay? And actually, one of the things that I do note, and it is a question that I think I would like officers to specifically address, is when I've looked through the papers that have been presented this evening, when the term cumulative comes up, in most instances, the cumulative impact that appears to have been assessed is the cumulative impact on highways. And actually, I've seen no sites that have been removed because overall there is too big a cumulative impact on the greenbelt. If I'm wrong in that, I would like you to point those sites out, because I can't find a site that on cumulative impact on greenbelt grounds has been excluded from the plan. And clearly there is that aspect to cumulative impact. HAT 11 and WG 12 narrow the gap between Hatfield and Welwyn Green by 50%, approaching 50%. It's a really substantial change in the gap between Southway and Pooley's Lane. And actually, I think that is a big indicator that that's not an appropriate approach to managing the greenbelt. The other aspect is the idea that HAT 11 produces any sort of defensible boundary is laughable. And I mean, how the assessment in the stage 3 greenbelt study can find that change in boundary isn't significant is beyond me, because it goes from a road in a cutting to a arbitrary line in the middle of a field. I mean, if that's not a significant adverse change to a greenbelt boundary, I don't know what is. So I think we've kind of got the balance wrong here, and I think what we need to do is say, no, the balance needs to be addressed. We need to have a balance between impact on the greenbelt and housing need. And personally, I can't agree with what's in the papers because I don't think that balance is right. Now, I get that it's a professional balance, it's a judgment, and I fully respect officers' position on their perspective of where that balance lies, but I just have to disagree.
Thank you, Paul. So just to be clear, your view is that we don't have the balance right at this time. If there was a balance that was more, I guess, aligned with your thoughts, you would support a plan.
I believe there is a plan that I could support, but the balance that's in this document isn't one that I could support.
Thank you. Okay, Colin, is it Colin or Sue? Are we going to start with this insufficient evidence or evidence not being robust enough versus meeting the prescribed objective housing need?
Thank you. I think I'd say when we submitted the plan last time, we submitted for 12,000. I think the OAN was somewhere between 12.5 and 13.5-ish. So clearly we were under the OAN at that point, but felt after deliberation that we could make an argument, particularly on greenbelt grounds with the evidence we had and infrastructure grounds with the evidence we had. The inspector hasn't accepted that argument to date, hence where we have got with extra greenbelt work. We have done that, and it does show there are moderate, high harm, very high harm sites. And you'll note that we haven't proposed any new high harm sites other than the primary school in Welwyn Green for the reasons I gave. That is something councillors might wish to think about. What level, if you wanted to find a consistent level of greenbelt harm, might be acceptable and might, in your view, better achieve that balance. And the two things I put in my presentation that, one, the inspector's worded for me, is that unless there are sound planning reasons, the full planning objective need for housing should be met, is his expectation. And my response to that, in terms of guiding you tonight and next week, is the best we can say to you is that the closer you are to the OAN of 16,000, the greater the likelihood that the plan will be found sound. The further we are from that, with planning arguments, we will go to bat for you and we will advocate your thoughts to the inspector and make the best case that we can. But the further we are from that 16, the likelihood of unsoundness increases. And I can't tell you where that point is that he might accept a lower number. That needs to be based upon the sound planning reasons. Greenbelt is clearly potentially one of those issues. But what we've done is got you to the 16,000 near enough, and to our minds got you what could be found to be a sound plan.
Thank you, Rebecca Lass. And I am, just for the record, I'm not picking on you, Sonny. I'm going to people who haven't spoken first, and then I'll come back to Sonny and Jane. Much as I would like to pick on you. I'm not.
Keep popping those guns, mate.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to reiterate the points that were made by Glyn and Paul. The work that's gone into this plan is enormous, and do appreciate the planning officer's time. And also the pressure that the council is under to deliver the targets that have been set by the inspector. However, I do have quite a few points to make about the plan, and specifically about Brookmans Park and Little Heath ward, which I represent. Firstly, I think it's quite disappointing that officers didn't speak to members individually regarding each of the specific areas. We have local connections, and we speak to residents on a daily basis about their opinions and what they feel is appropriate and not. So I think I would have appreciated that. And additionally, we spend a lot of time, well, DMC spends a lot of time going through small planning applications and rejecting quite a few on the terms of that it's harming the greenbelt land, bearing in mind some of these might be a small extension to somebody's house. This plan completely overrides all those decisions that have been made, and especially in Brookmans Park and Little Heath, every single piece of developed land that has been applied for is on moderate or moderate to high harm to the greenbelt land. Also, site BP12A in particular is very close to WEG6, which I fear is basically coalescence of the two villages. People want to live in a village, they want to move to Brookmans Park and Welwyn Green to live in a village environment. This would in effect join the two villages, and the infrastructure and the amenities of the two villages basically wouldn't be able to cope with the massive amount of increase in housing. I did a little bit of background research. Over the past 15 years, Welwyn Hatfield has had an increase of 18% housing. This plan would increase housing in the next 15 years by 38%, which I just feel is unsustainable. And maybe would like the officers to look at the numbers. They seem very high. And finally, the point that, Chairman, you made earlier about a solution to the problems that we're bringing up. I'd just like to draw officers and members' attention to the site PB1, which was raised by Councillor Sarson earlier during his when he spoke earlier. The site is the Enfield Chase Estate land south of Coopers Lane Road in Potters Bar. It was promoted through the call for sites, and according to the papers, there was a few reasons why officers didn't put this site forward for the new local plan. And I'd really like officers to go back and have a look at this site because, for example, some of the reasons were the need for a number of surveys and reports to be undertaken. Why weren't these undertaken? Insufficient evidence provided. The officers need to press the County Council, who I think brought forward this site for the evidence for this site to be deemed appropriate. And another one was the noise from the traffic to the M25 being in close proximity to the site. The government is looking to phase out petrol and diesel cars within the next 15, 20 years. So realistically, that wouldn't be a problem in the future. So yeah, that's my main solution. I'd like officers to go back and reconsider site PB1. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin or Sue? Which one? Colin?
I think for now I will note your comments in terms of the relationship between BP12A and WEG6. We have looked at that, we have considered that as part of the Green Gap work, but yes, I acknowledge it does bring those two communities closer than they are at present. We have tested thoroughly the OAN. We've used independent consultants on a number of occasions to look very closely at the fact that it is a big number compared to the historic growth of the borough. That's been tested at examination and it has found to be valid, and we can't reject that information, unfortunately. It's there and that's what it says. The government also had a standard housing methodology in the MPPF, and that's coming out with an even higher annual number at the moment. So again, coming from population projections, household projections, that is what those numbers and those methodologies and those government policies are yielding at the moment, and it's difficult for us to avoid that data at the moment. And yeah, I note your comment on PB1, and we will see what we can do for next Wednesday.
Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just to acknowledge Jane's comments about the airfield. We did spend a lot of time talking to people on the doorstep that we got the numbers to 650, and I think people did accept that. Another increase won't go down well at all. But basically, Colin, bit of a bombshell there about the weak quarter. I know the silos are 11 stories equivalent. To add further stories, that's what you were saying? To increase the amount of flats?
I tried to pick my words carefully. We've known that the landowners were thinking about this, but it was only at the beginning of this week that we had the first meeting with them, where I said, would you be happy for me to mention this to councillors tonight? And they were. They are looking at submitting planning applications for, they suggested potentially up to 700 to 900 new homes. At the moment, the permission for the site achieves building stories of up to 8, and they suggested this might take them higher. I'm scared to tell you the number, but it's higher. We haven't tested any of that. That's what the pre-application process is for, partially, and then a planning application if it comes forward, where we would engage all the statutory bodies. So the obvious ones would be the county council in terms of highways and education, Historic England in terms of the impact of taller buildings on Welwyn Garden City and the surrounding area. And as mentioned, when we've tried to build tall buildings in Hatfield, the existence of Hatfield House has been key to what is achievable. So we are not assuming that this will necessarily be acceptable. What I wanted to do is just acknowledge that there might, in time, be scope for more housing at the Week Quarter site, and I wouldn't necessarily want this committee to feel that they didn't have that information as soon as it was available, such that the council moved to allocate greenbelt land and then potentially saw many hundreds of new homes potentially coming forward at the Week Quarter site. What I can't do is recommend a number that might go into the plan at this stage, because I simply don't have the information or the evidence to advise what a sensible number might be, even if it isn't the 700 to 900 that they're thinking about. What we might be able to do, and we can think about this for next Wednesday, is put something in the consultation document, because bear in mind, we aren't submitting anything we decide in the next week. We are putting it out for consultation. We might be able to put something that identifies some potential for extra housing on the Week Quarter site, a lower number of a few hundred maybe, but again, don't quote me on what that number is. I think that's for you to think what you might think could be acceptable. That means we go out to consultation on it. By that point, we will have progressed pre-application. We will hopefully have a better position on what we think might be achievable on that site by the time we come back to discuss the results of the consultation in May, and therefore you might be able to put a firmer number in the sites that you submit to the inspector on the basis of that extra evidence, and that means you're not adding something in new that hasn't been part of the consultation document. So we can try and put some proposal together for you for Wednesday that might go some way in that regard, and that would essentially increase the urban site number. And if no other changes are made, that would mean we would exceed the OAN.
Okay, Barbara.
Come back on that. First of all, this is a garden city. I think, you know, when the proposals we accepted at DMC, 2 years ago, about the height of the buildings then was concerning. There's no and lack of parking. I certainly would not be happy with further stories on this building. Already in Broadwater Road, the construction that's happened along that road is enormous. You know, office blocks have been turned into houses and flats, etc. Certainly the local health services, the GPs, just, well, wouldn't cope with that amount of extra residents. So, yeah, I think you gathered from the intake of breath from the residents here tonight that is quite a shock. Thank you.
Okay, Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to express my issues with a few of the sites I have personally alongside with the residents of Hatfield Villages. So firstly, I'll come to Lempsford Village. So my first issue is with STL 13, which is a Roebuck development. I feel personally it's not suitable due to the road access is extremely limited, and Lempsford is a very small village, and putting all of those housing in one sort of small area is just going to ruin the character of the village. Alongside the residents also feel that as well. There'll also be issues in terms of traffic increase, and there's also a primary school which is already full up as it is now, so where are they sort of, you know, going to have as residents. However, I also understand that there is an importance of housing needs. So what I would like to suggest is to move the development from one side of the road to the other. So the other development, which is STL 5, is actually the archery field. I think that I'm not too sure on how many dwellings you could put there. However, I have spoke to the residents in Lempsford, and they are on the same page as I am, where we would find that it wouldn't really encroach onto the existing developments already. And the archery club, which is good news, has already found a different site to use. So they would be happy to actually use that space for something else. I also have another issue with Hat 1 development. It's a very large development along with Simon's Hyde in that area. I know Hatfield Villages, you know, it's a lot of greenbelt. I'm particularly for the greenbelt, I must say. However, I just find that this report is adding in another 100 houses because they just have the space to do so. We also need to look at what Glyn was saying in terms of I use the Cooper's Green Lane every day to work, and it is full already. There's been 3 accidents on that road this week alone because people are just going too slow. There's too much traffic in that road. I don't know what they're going to do. To put it on a positive, though, I'm very happy with the new secondary school. So, you know, in balance, you know, things, we can work to something that works for everyone. We just need to find what that balance is. And also I want to back Councillor Sarson and Lass with PB1. Absolutely feel that we should be looking at that. That is a great area to put housing there. And it sort of, you know, it takes away from, it distributes the proportion of housing evenly, I feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, I think I'll just say we'll note those sites as offered. We'll have a look and come back with some thoughts on PB1 and the suggestion for Lempsford and the alternative site you've suggested.
Yeah, and great contribution, Drew, I must say. On that note, Sonny?
Okay. Point taken, Your Worship. I will try and be more succinct. If I could talk about Welwyn, okay, all the wells, as it were. One of the recurring messages I got back from residents was the impact of widening that bridge, but particularly the impact of that on, A, the river, Minran River, in terms of the chalk stream and how that's going to be impacted. So I didn't read a lot of that. And then earlier on, you said that no evidence studies had been shown how that would impact on the nature reserve. However, you said that you spoke to wildlife groups. I'd like to know which wildlife groups you spoke to, because I'm sure the Welwyn Hatfield Immunity Group would have also spoken to them. And the other thing is, increasing traffic around there is an issue for residents, and I can say in the last 2 weeks, there have been 2 major fatalities only about a mile away from there, which brought the whole, on a Saturday between 10 and 4, brought the whole of A1M to a standstill. So those are those questions that are specific and trying to be constructive. The other thing, you wanted solutions. I was wondering, when you go back and look at PB1, if you were to possibly take out, and I'd take the point the Liberal Democrats take, that there's something they can accept, but not right now. If we took out the moderate to high harm areas and substituted them possibly for PB1, how close would we get to this 16,000? And one of the things that I think a lot of the residents are worried about is the word called trust. They just don't seem to trust the words, things, if we do this, and if this happens, and if this happens after that. You have to gain their trust. And yes, I echo planning department done a great job, a lot of paperwork, all that stuff. But it's the trust. Do they trust what you're saying? Do they trust how you're going to say that? And I know that's not an answer you can give right now. But it is something you need to look at, because they don't trust you. They don't trust how this method has gone. And the sort of Damocles of this 16,000 hangs over. If we take the Liberal Democrat stand, and that's their stand that they'd like to take, we're never really going to get close to that 1,600, even if we voted to it. So we have to actually understand what happens, what happens because of that. And we can never make any decision as a committee, as a council, because there is so much uncertainty. We went with 12,000, that was rejected. We're going to come to 16,000, but maybe we can look a few other. But ultimately, we need to have some, and it's difficult for you because you don't know what the head inspector is going to say. But it's always going to hand, because if it's a hard 16,000, we can debate this till midnight, come to a solution which won't be 16,000, and then he says, no, I don't accept that. So there has to be some sort of to and fro in this sort of process. I hope that satisfies you, Chairman.
Yes, well done. Good man. It's come up a few times, so PB1. And what would a solution look like if we took into consideration some of the comments from Paul earlier?
The things I think I can answer now are we would have consulted the key ecological bodies, the Environment Agency, English, Natural England, and various others, Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, Hertfordshire Ecology, and any other local bodies that are on our database, which I would imagine would include local Welwyn ones as well. And in terms of the statutory and the kind of regulatory bodies, so not so much the local ones, but the Environment Agency, Natural England side of things, there was nothing particular said that gave us cause that something couldn't be done in that regard. If you removed everything, if you removed all high harm sites and all moderate to high harm sites and only selected moderate sites and urban sites and the other sites we've proposed, I think the number you would deliver would be in the order of 11,000 from recollection when we did that. So you would be losing a lot. It would be a lower number than in the plan already submitted that the inspector isn't willing to find sound. And I think there would also be a few issues in terms of some of the sites, and they would no longer be brought forward in whole but in part. So, some sites are a combination of harm categories because they're large, such as HAT 1. So in theory, you wouldn't be building all of them. That would mean you might have struggles with delivering infrastructure. So my recommendation would be, don't just take that approach. You would need to look more carefully at what results in a sustainable pattern of development and what delivers the necessary infrastructure if you were minded to go down that route. But again, we can come back with a bit more guidance next week. And again, PB1 would be part of that.
Sonny, yeah.
Thank you, Colin. Is it possible to see, when you were consulted these wildlife and all the associations, if there's any documented sort of, is it a case that you asked them specifically, or did they just say, we actually have looked at your plan and we thought everything is fine?
Sue?
Thank you. So Hertfordshire Ecology are specifically consulted as part of the assessment that goes into of the suitability of sites, and that is reported on in the Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment. Then groups such as Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust are a consultee, so when we consulted on the sites, they were asked to respond. We didn't specifically ask them specifically about this site, but it was open for them to respond and express any concerns relating to those sites in Welwyn Village.
Jane?
Hi. I just wanted to unpick the word sustainability a little bit. Welwyn Hatfield Council has declared a climate emergency. And I believe we have got the length of this plan, 20 years, to make substantial reductions in the CO2 in this country and the world. Otherwise, there will be serious consequences. And I think we could do more within the policies on the construction and transport in the local plan to actually achieve houses which use less energy and which are better insulated. I noticed the non-residential housing is specified as BREEAM excellent standard, but there are no mandated standards for what we expect for residential housing. I think we should be aiming higher and actually trying to achieve some of those CO2 reductions in this plan. For instance, we should be removing gas as a central heating and as an energy supply from buildings, because we know we have to remove gas boilers from new buildings in the near future anyway. That's what the government has said. I also think that our choice of sites needs to think more carefully about sustainability. If you build, say, Simon's Hyde, you will have your sustainability appraisal says that it's all very well because you're going to have a bus route. That doesn't work. I mean, after 5 years and the money runs out, that bus will disappear. We all have suffered from that in the whole of this borough. And people will resort to using their cars. I don't think we can allocate sites which are so far from GPs, from shops, from train stations. And we should be considering the total impact of transport when we talk about sustainability. I think Birchall Garden suburb is also one that is a long way from the centre of Welwyn Garden City, and we should again look at the sustainability of that. I noticed in the comments that the Forestry Commission said there should be a 300-metre boundary between ancient woodland and housing, and I would like the Planning Department just to double check whether that is the case. Certainly Simon's Hyde has ancient woodland, Panshanger Airfield has ancient woodland. I believe part of the Birchall Garden suburb has got ancient woodland, and in fact Brooklands Park in BP12, BRP12. I also object to the sustainability appraisal that we have and the way it is actually being used to weight some of the sites. The way it's been used is to say that are there more double plus, double positive aspects to this site than there are double negatives. Now, the report has been put through with so many automatic double positives. if you build houses which are in walking distance of a school, that's a double positive. I would say that's a simple thing that you need to ascertain before you build them. Does it have affordable housing? That's a double positive. Well, if it doesn't have affordable housing, it doesn't comply with the other policies in the local plan. It shouldn't be there. So there are so many double positives that it's actually impossible for any site to achieve a less favourable rating on that basis.
Thank you.
And sorry, just two other quick points. I am a resident of Lemsford, and I don't actually recall speaking to you about that, Drew.
We don't knock on your door.
No, you didn't. The other residents that I have spoken to as neighbours would prefer the housing as it has been selected, and they would welcome the fact that his numbers have been kept to 27, which I think is more in proportion with the size of the village. Any more than that would be a larger impact on the village. I think the archery site, has even worse problems with access on the road, and I think a lot of people would not prefer that as an allocation.
Okay, thank you. Can we be more ambitious with sustainability within the local plan?
We try to keep up with national policy, and we try to insert local policies that make us more sustainable by looking at the evidence, by looking at the viability, by looking at the sustainability appraisal. In terms of sustainable construction, we included a policy for commercial buildings using the BREEAM programme because that existed at the time. At the time we wrote and submitted the policy, there was no equivalent for housing because the Code for Sustainable Homes had been deleted by the government. Since that time, BRE has published a Home Quality Mark initiative, and that's something we could look at, either through the plan, although some of those policies have already been examined, or through a subsequent design guide. More usefully, the government is currently consulting on building regulations. I can't remember what the document's called, but within that, as part of their commitment to achieve net zero carbon by 2050, they are proposing an increase in building regulation standards for houses in 2020, and then a further increase in 2025 that would mean that houses are 75 to 80% more energy efficient than they are now. So my recommendation would be, if that does get incorporated into building regulations, it is a far better way of achieving sustainability in houses, because developers will know up front if they don't build to that standard, they won't get their completion certificate and that house won't be saleable. That, to my mind, is better than planning policies where planners in the room will grant permission on the basis of what a developer says, but we don't have the same ability to check, whereas building control officers do have that power to sign off. So I think that is an improvement that hopefully reassures you on that point. In terms of transport, the County Council has Local Transport Plan 4, which has gone far further in terms of sustainability than any plan I've ever seen them produce. And they are talking very seriously about, the solution to growth and development is not new roads wherever possible, but it is public transport, walking, cycling, other technologies that may become available as we go. We have selected, generally, smaller sites within and near settlements, wherever we can. The civic exercise rejected sites that don't adjoin a settlement because we felt they would be less sustainable from the outset. Where we've selected larger sites, strategic sites, and working with the County Council, the belief is that they have the capacity to look at solving some of their transport challenges, and that might make bus services viable. That might mean they can afford to build cycleways into communities. We saw at the week quarter that there was a presumption of a low parking rate and the inclusion in the planning permission of car hire schemes and those sort of initiatives. So they are now being inserted into planning applications. And in terms of the sustainability, the higher level point I'll make is that, as well as looking purely from an environmental and a climate change perspective, a sustainability appraisal is a whole appraisal, and that looks at economic and social aspects as well. Building houses in general ticks a social box of meeting housing need. It can also tick an economic box, and hence it's not just about environment, and if it doesn't go in that direction, it doesn't automatically mean a negative score. Hopefully that answers all the points you raised.
Thank you. And that sounds, Jane, that sounds to me like we can certainly be more ambitious, if that, especially if that means that that gets you closer to being comfortable with a local plan. So it probably would be helpful if after this meeting there is some kind of dialogue between yourself and Colin and the team about how we can potentially be more ambitious in that area. Okay, next, Aisha.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I would like to start by thanking Colin and his team for producing all this report for us. My both learned friend has, I think, put quite valid points in front, so there's no point of repetition. However, I do not, as a representative of my people, I do not support the idea of additional 75 to 90 numbers of houses to be added to 650 houses, which have been already planned and in papers clearly because of the high harm.
Sorry, which area are you talking about?
Pansanger.
Pansanger.
The airfield. Clearly because of the high harm and the use of greenbelt. If 650 houses were not enough, then to suggest to push further into the greenbelt, the fact that it needs to form part of the green corridor linking the river to Pansanger Park. We could lose a lot of spaces that was designed in the outline planning application for 650 open land for recreation. It also has the most negative of any site in the sustainability. I'm sorry if I'm being harsh to use such term, but if lack of infrastructure or open land, then all I can visualize is future human cages rather than a structure where you can see community interact or grow. With their children having enough room to play, rather depending on the long-distance parks, not to mention the ongoing health concerns that we have, hence obesity. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin?
Noted.
Noted, okay. Alan. Where is Alan?
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It's just is it right that in theory a football will be able to be kicked from Hatfield into somebody who lives in Welwyn Garden City's back garden? This seems to be coming up to really coalescing and merging the two towns. But the other point, I keep saying that's all I'm going to say, but other points being, over the past 20 years, whenever we've looked at road structures and parking, we've always been hit because people, the county have said it's okay, the roads are big enough. When the de Havilland site was built on, we went round there on a Saturday morning and they're 4-bedroom houses. We said, well, the roads are still narrow. Oh, but they've got a carport. These are 4 and 5-bedroom houses. Now, that's my dig at the county. As far as the week quarter's concerned, they've been trying to take away, ever since the first planning application came in. I suppose they still want their motorcycle museum. But if you're putting this many more homes on that site, that part of Pear Tree is just crowded. The old Pear Tree School wasn't built for that. I know there's plans that they're going to build a new one. I hope it's built before the old one falls down. But it's this bit about transport. Nowadays, there are tradespeople who rely on vehicles. And an electric vehicle will not cover their distances each day. Now we've gone into electric power. Now we're being told that the power people wouldn't be able to sustain it. So this is going to be further than 30 years' time before we can say, yes, we are carbon neutral. It's all right for those in London saying we're carbon neutral, but I can just jump on a bus. But getting from here to St Albans is a nightmare. But again, this thing about getting rid of gas boilers, what is electricity made up of? Gas turbines. Are we all going to have a wind turbine in our back garden to sustain the electricity? And that's my grouse. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. Noted? Okay, good. Pankit, who lives in my ward.
Thank you, Chair. Still, I'm not going to vote for you. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what my colleague Glyn said. Obviously, I'm not going to repeat everything, but I just want to say very well done to Colin and his team for putting this wonderful report. I know you can't please everyone. Not many people are happy with the recommendation, what is in the report. But I'm afraid I have to say I am also not happy with some of the recommendation in this report. I do have some concerns with regards to the actual local plan. To me, again, it's not very sound. And I do agree with Paul in terms of balancing the housing need versus the harm to the green belt. I think, to me, officers haven't quite looked into that in very detail. And I think we cannot risk our green belt in terms of putting just meeting the objective assessment needs for housing. In terms of Simon's Hyde, again, to me, it's not sustainable. I mean, to me, the definition of sustainable is you need to have, people need to cycle, people need to walk, people need to use the public transport. Now, looking at the Cooper's Green Lane, obviously, I live in Garden Village, as just Samuel said, and I do use Cooper's Green Lane every day, and the traffic is gridlock. There are no existing footpath on Cooper's Green Lane. There are no footpaths on Green Lane. So I don't know how these 800 houses in Simon's Hyde and another 1,500 houses in Hat 1 will be using. I think they have to use car because there is no way they can walk. There are no footpaths. So the way I can see, there will be another 1,500 to 2,000 cars will be in Cooper's Green Lane and Garden Village. And as I just said, is completely gridlock. I have to change my kids' classes just because I couldn't reach in the time. And it's absolutely in the morning and peak hours, rush hours. There is no way you can reach, at least take 45 to 50 minutes. And again, I don't know what Hertfordshire highways are just saying about the transportation, because there is no way you can widen those roads, or there is no way you can improve those roundabout because there is no space. So I don't know how they're going to accommodate those 2,000 cars. And again, in terms of school, I agree with Glyn and Drew, because the existing primary school is already running over capacity. There are no spaces, and in terms of having these more houses, I don't know where those kids are going to go. And I think, lastly, I think I was just listening to Sunny, actually. He just said he lives in Welwyn Village and he doesn't like to have houses. I mean, we all live we all represent our own ward, and if we all just say we don't like these houses in our ward, so I don't know where we're going to put those houses. So I think we don't have any choice. Thank you, Chair.
Well said, my constituent. Drew.
Sorry, thank you. Just one other point. I just also want to say that I completely disagree with removing Lempsford and Stanborough from the Greenbelt. I think keeping them in the Greenbelt is absolute priority right now as well, especially for Hatfield villages, especially if Hat 1 goes ahead. And just to address Jane as well, sorry for the Lempsford meeting. It was at 6 o'clock today, so it was a bit of a quick one. But also in terms of the archery field, I have had a look, and don't quote me on this, but I think there was around 10 houses or so on the archery field compared to 27, which came down from 64. from the other one across the road. So the archery field would still be a better development than the Roebuck. Thanks.
Okay, Paul.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on Colin's response to Sonny, because I think, again, Colin's expressed a position about the previously submitted local plan that I find difficult to reconcile with my understanding of what the inspector actually said. Because what Colin responded to Sonny by saying was, we submitted a plan with 12,000 houses in it, and it didn't go through the inspector because, and he implied that that was why it didn't go through. The inspector's response was for me, pretty clear. He said, I can't let you have an OAN, a plan that misses the OAN, unless you can demonstrate the harm to the Greenbelt, and you have failed to do that. And that's why he asked you to commission the third stage study. Now, if you've demonstrated that the harm to the Greenbelt is too much, then the data tells you what your house building target becomes, not an arbitrary figure that's calculated from population projections. Okay. I think that because we are constrained in the way we're constrained with Greenbelt, we ought to be doing that. Now, there's a discussion, I think, to be had about what level of harm is acceptable, okay? And I would very much go with Sonny's position that moderate high is too high, okay? That's my perspective. If we had a policy that moderate high was too high, then you look at what sites are left, and if the infrastructure is not deliverable for those sites fall out as well. Because you have a valid planning reason. You have a policy reason why one site can't go forward, i.e. too much harm to the Greenbelt. You have another policy reason, the infrastructure isn't deliverable on this set of sites in isolation to remove those sites. That, for me, is how we should be doing it. Now, I appreciate that other people might disagree. I'm sure Colin is likely to disagree, but I think that that's my position, and I would hope that I get some support in that sort of stance, because I think that's the way that we ought to be doing this.
So, Colin, essentially going in that direction would result in us submitting a plan with fewer homes than the plan that was rejected by the inspector.
Well, because of the reasons I said.
And so I guess the question here today is, to what extent have we gone back and found the evidence that we need to say that actually, even if we went back to the inspector, what we found will not result in him saying, actually, you're right, and maybe Paul's assumptions are correct, and actually he will still want us to get closer to that 16,000.
We've done the Greenbelt Stage 3. We have identified the harm level of the different sites. We've put our recommendation forward that we believe gives you the best chance of having a sound plan and avoiding all of the risks that come without a plan. It's a matter for you now to judge what level of harm to the Greenbelt you consider to be too much harm, i.e. unacceptable harm, and some of you may think moderate is okay, but moderate high isn't. Some of you may think that moderate high is okay, but high isn't. That's what this panel is for now. I would judge. All I can do is remind you of the issues associated with that.
So we'll go to Sin and we'll come back to you, Paul.
Just add, if the microphone, thank you. So if you recall, one of the things the inspector asked us to do is to say what parts of the Greenbelt it was most essential to retain. And that was an extremely difficult exercise for the consultants to do. They did the harm assessment. I think the general conclusion was that the very high harm areas should be retained in their entirety. But I would agree with Colin that it is for the council to decide what is the appropriate level of harm. But if you were to have a strategy which was just based on moderate harm, then you wouldn't have the strategic allocations in Welwyn Garden City, the urban extension. You would have some, but not all of the strategic allocation at Hatfield. You would then have growth in Stanborough. You would then have growth in Lemsford. You would have growth in Welwyn Green, but you wouldn't have growth in any of the other more sustainable villages which have stations and, you know, which would generally be considered to be more sustainable. So you'd be concentrating growth in those really small villages which actually don't have services and facilities themselves. So then you come back to the legal duty to promote sustainable development, and is that actually a sustainable strategy? So I accept that if that's not considered to be sustainable, then you take out those sites. So then you're perhaps down to very limited release of land from the Greenbelt. Then the inspector will look at the scale of the shortfall in terms of the overall OAN, and the shortfall would be considerable. Now, nobody knows where the inspector will find the right balance, but that is a huge gap.
Paul, have you had sight of the Greenbelt study?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, very much so. Yeah, I spent a great deal of time looking through it and looking at it. But I mean, I just in defence of that, there are, I would say, some significant inconsistencies in some of the assessment of those sites, but I also recognise that that's my perspective of their inconsistency, and that another person might view it as being consistent. And actually, I think that the consultants have done as good a job as you could possibly expect them to do in terms of impacting their judgment on the sites. So I think we ought to take that as robust evidence, because it is defensible, I would argue, because it has been done by somebody with the right qualifications and all the rest of it. So I'm not trying to pick apart that study, and what I'm trying to get to is that it is our choice as a council as to where we put that policy barrier, and what then subsequently happens to the sites that are on there. And I get, okay, that the further we are away from the OAN, the riskier it becomes. But one of the things that I think we ought to be cognizant of is the risk that we do damage to our community is the other side of that coin. So whatever we do, there is a risk. If we build 16,000 houses in the next 15 years, okay, I believe there is a significant and substantial risk that we will do irreparable harm to our communities. Equally, there is a risk if we build less, or substantially less than that, that the inspector will throw it out, and some of that will happen anyway. Okay? So there is risk here, and we can't get away from that. What we have to do, as councillors, I believe, is decide what level of risk is acceptable in what context. For me, moderate high harm is where the line should be drawn. Okay? For other people, you may have a different perception of risk and a different judgment as to where that line should be. And that is up to councillors to determine. But I've told you where mine is.
Good. And I'm still coming back to you. I suppose for you and your group, when you're talking about risk, the challenge is if our new plan is given to the inspector, he throws it out, the risk is then that this panel has no power. And then, of course, it's up to county, etc., to make that decision. Do you not feel like that is a bigger risk? Yeah, of course.
We're enjoying this. We're enjoying this debate. Okay, so the risk that this panel becomes powerless. How much power have we got in the face of government telling us what ROAN is and saying you have to hit it, and we are just going to go, all right, we're going to go within 48 houses of it? Actually, I would say that in a local context, we've almost been disempowered anyway in that scenario. The other aspect is whether the government would actually intervene. And I was having a discussion about this just yesterday in County Hall. Okay, because the most likely scenario is the one that Colin pointed me at, that we see playing out to a certain extent in South Oxfordshire. Now, there is a proposal or the powers of being suspended from South Oxford District Council, not on the basis of Greenbelt and local plan issues that we're facing here. In that instance, it's a dispute over infrastructure and the infrastructure component of a plan. He's threatening to intervene. He's been threatening to intervene now for some period of time. Okay, he's suggesting that Oxfordshire County Council will take over and intervene. But I'm absolutely aware. You look at the statements that are being made in those contexts, and there is a real reluctance to do that. And there's a real reluctance to do that, I believe, because it will cost the Secretary of State a very significant amount of money to intervene. He's struggling with the resources anyway, and Oxfordshire County Council don't have the resources to put in place to take over a local plan straight away. They would have to do an awful lot of firefighting to do it, so they don't want to do it either. So there's a reluctance on the part of the government and the county council in that area to actually get to the point where they take the powers away from the local council. So we're not looking at an open door here. Okay, it's something that will not happen, and the Secretary of State, I believe, will be very reluctant to do unless he's almost compelled to do it. So I think the threat is perhaps not as great as we might first perceive.
Okay. So, no, it's good. Glenn, could you? I know you have some comments you want to make, but also it'd be really good to know where you as a group, if you as a group have a unified position on how we could get to a point where you have a plan that you are happy with.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so I've got a couple of quick points ready to start with. The Pansanger airfield that we've been going on about, can we just confirm that that is the actual set aside the grass airfield site part of it? Very quickly. It is. It's fine. I just had a nod. That's okay. So that currently is within this council's, I want to say business plan, but I can't remember exactly which document it is. But we have it there that this council will provide an area set aside for a grass-tracked airfield. So if we're now promoting it, we're going against one of our own. It's in our policy document. We signed it in CPPP at the beginning of the year. I can't remember what it is, but Marie will remember. Sorry. Yes.
Colin?
Thank you. When we agreed to submit the plan back in 2016, a adjustment was made at that time that land to the north of the Pansanger housing site was identified as having potential for a runway in order to re-provide for the runway that would be lost by the allocation of the old runway. That was debated at a hearing session in 2017, 2018, some time ago, and the inspector considered it and all the evidence, and he ultimately recommended, I can't remember the precise wordings, but in essence he didn't see that an airfield was achievable there, and everybody in the room essentially agreed that technically it couldn't fit, and therefore he gave guidance to max out that site for housing. What we've done subsequently is granted outline planning permission for 650 homes on the land that we allocated in the submitted plan, and we did so because it was area of special restraints from a previous district plan. It wasn't Greenbelt, and that was in order to try and help with our 5-year housing land supply position. What we now believe is that there is the area of land to the north where it was intended that there was going to be an airfield, and that's what our submitted plan says, but evidence from the examination and the view of the inspector is that isn't feasible, and therefore in his mind it's available for housing. And on that basis we've looked at it, concluded in our report that it could be another 75 homes, and since we published the report 2 weeks ago, have engaged with the landowner and now believe there may be scope across the whole of both sites, the north and the south, to achieve an extra 90 homes, a total of 815 if you are looking for extra units. And the scheme already submitted, the outline, would essentially be redevised via reserve matters applications to achieve slightly higher densities on the south site in order to achieve slightly lower densities on the north site, given its location close to the valley, looking down into a protected valley. So that's an option. It's not in the recommendations, but it is something I'm now proposing to you as an option in light of all the other options you've been airing over the course of this evening.
Glenn?
Okay. However, if we promote this 75 as it currently is, I don't think at the minute we can actually do that as a council, because in our policy document that we stated that we would provide provision for an airfield to be there. So until that comes back to us in CPPP to get rid of that piece of paper and sign it off, because I specifically made sure that wording was in it, because I was in the 2016 meeting, and it was the only reason that I agreed that Pansanger should go in the local plan at all was that that provision was made. So unless we change that policy document, I can't see how we can go against something which the council, full council, has mandated that we do. I'll let you come back on that, Colin.
Yep. We're obviously debating principally new sites to include in the plan to hopefully get to a sound position. However, clearly the debate is going beyond that and is looking at sites that are already in the plan. If there is any decision as a result of this panel to remove sites already in the plan, we are essentially amending the submitted plan. To my mind, this panel has the ability to do that because it was this panel that started the process of agreeing to submit that plan anyway. That would, in the initial instance, be potentially ratified by Cabinet for consultation, which it's its constituted power. It would go out for consultation, it would come back to this panel, and it would ultimately go to Cabinet. Cabinet has the power to submit things to the inspector. And through that process, depending what is decided, you would be amending elements of the submitted plan and also adding in new sites. That, to my mind, is a legitimate function of this panel, but you have to be aware that you would be amending the plan as submitted, and we would be advocating those changes to the inspector on top of any new sites. And the totality of that would be, hopefully, an adopted plan.
Because I'm trying to be quick. And I totally get what you're saying, Colin. However, whilst this panel has that power, I don't believe this panel has the power to go against something that full council has mandated through. And I'd need Nick to find that policy. It's a massive, huge document which we sign every year.
Okay, so Nick will look into that for you.
Yeah, if we can have a look into that for the next meeting, because
Sure.
I don't believe we've got the power over full council. Moving on, I was going to quickly mention stuff about the Lib Dems position. Their leader seems to suggest at the beginning that, the longer this drags on, it's more time and more money. and yet the panel are suggesting that we possibly fundamentally change the plan. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but we fundamentally change the plan, which is obviously going to take more time and more money. If we massively change the plan, as I understand it, then it would mean that we've basically got to resubmit. That's going to take an amount of time, as I understand it, and I'm welcome to be corrected. If I take it at that point there, then some of these larger developments can come forward on their own, again, as I understand, and if we reject them, because we haven't got a local plan in place, what sort of money are we going to need to set aside for the appeals process? Because that's got to be a costly process. Give me a rough shot in the dark there, because that's got to be a costly process, and we need to have a good idea and what these sort of things are going to do before we sort of torch or butcher the plan to a point that it becomes a new plan.
Okay. First point would be, if the decision of this cabinet panel was that it was a substantially lower number, and we're talking very substantially low, so in the 10, 11,000 range, I would write the most charming letter I could muster to the inspector, telling him what had happened and why it had happened, and encouraging him to allow the examination to continue. I can only guess that if it was a number in striking distance of 16,000 with a cover letter, he might say, okay, I'm willing to hear the council out on its justification, whereas if it's a very low number, he's more likely to say, what's gone on here? I think I will suspend the examination at minimum to let the council work out what it's actually doing. Or he may say, well, this clearly isn't what I asked for. I suggest you withdraw and start again. I can't guarantee what he will do, but that's my best guess. If we find ourselves in that situation, then we don't have a 5-year housing land supply, and we clearly won't be in a position of easily having one against the government standard methodology, which is what we would we already defer to it to some extent, but we would definitely defer to that, because we wouldn't have any sort of plan in existence. If it was withdrawn, it wouldn't have a great, if any, status potentially. Then we are receiving planning applications principally for urban and employment sites. Suddenly that weak quarter development potentially has a greater chance of getting through, either through us because we accept our position, or through appeal, as do other employment sites, as do other urban sites. As part of the examination last year, most of the developers in the room acknowledged that in the first instance they probably wouldn't try submitting greenbelt sites because they didn't think that we would be minded to contemplate them until the plan was at least on its way to being found sound and being adopted. They are potentially more likely to think about submitting applications. It would then be for us to judge whether we wanted to accept any of those. In all cases, they would need to follow the MPPF and demonstrate very special circumstances that was appropriate, and that, on the presumption it's not delegated to me, would be a matter that committee considers. If they were refused and then appealed, we would have to defend that decision at appeal. The NTEC site that was appealed a couple of years ago, bear in mind it was an urban employment site, we refused it because we didn't want to see the loss of employment line. That was appealed. That cost us in the order of £50,000 to defend the appeal, our costs in terms of legal, etc. They didn't challenge for costs, but developers do have the right to challenge for costs where they believe the decision-making process was inappropriate, invalid, etc. Developers can spend many hundreds of thousands of pounds preparing planning applications, the planning application fee, the pre-application fee, all of the requisite studies, the environmental statement, to then appear at an appeal. most likely inquiries, given the nature and the size of the schemes. That involves legal advice on both sides. Those costs rack up. I can't give you a cost. There may be developers in the room who can give me some numbers that I can quote to you at the next meeting. I believe, don't hold me to absolute account on this, but I'm sure I've heard before that St Albans put aside about £1 million a year for that type of activity.
Thank you. Glyn, or
I'm trying to get it. I'll get to you. What you need to do.
thank you. Please do. Okay.
Okay, so where do we stack up at the moment as the Labour group? I'm hearing that the Lib Dem argument for going down, massively appealing, and then suddenly it seems like a bit of a nuclear option at the same time. So that's something definitely got to weigh up. Going through. I don't like any of the recommendations that we had really put before us. Without some modification, there has to be some give or take. You've heard roughly what's going around, but ultimately, there is no position. There is absolutely no position when it comes to this local plan. Nobody wants it. But the developers, they're not going to necessarily want what we allow them to have. They're going to want more. You've got the residents. None of them want it. And you talk to anybody, nobody wants it. They do want housing, but nobody wants what we're proposing. None of us councillors, let's be honest, none of us councillors want it. There is no position. We can't be for really anything. When you actually put it down on a piece of paper, it is the worst. And I'm not saying the worst plan come before us, but it is the worst decision that you ever have to make, because it's a decision that absolutely nobody in this borough wants, including us. We'll see what we can concede at the next meeting, and maybe there'll be more coming out from the Lib Dem side in that meeting. I'm sure something's got to give next time. We have no choice, one way or another. But right now, I can tell you right now that none of our residents are happy, and none of us are happy, and we shall see where that leads us. Thank you, Chair.
And on that note, so a few very quick points. I suppose we've had a really constructive debate. I think didn't start too well, but we got there in the end. On Glenn's point, this is definitely a difficult decision for everyone, but I suppose the government is to choose, and we're in a position where we can hopefully do right by our residents, and not necessarily risk it all by hoping that the inspector responds to anything that is too aggressive on our part in a good way. I think from the Conservative group, the main thing, amongst others, that's come out is around this PB1, seeing how that could possibly help us to find a healthy compromise. And I guess from the Lib Dem group, this idea of being more ambitious in terms of sustainability, and having a bit more balance when it comes to protecting the greenbelt is a key theme amongst others. So please, everybody in the panel, if you have further comments or questions, engage with Colin, Sue, and the rest of the team. I suppose the last thing to say is we'll see you all, well, maybe all of you as well, next week, Wednesday. This meeting is now adjourned.